South Sudan was separated from Sudan in 2011 before all the terms of the divorce, quote unquote, had been reached. Relations between the neighbors were expected to be difficult, but few of us foretold bombing raids hitting refugee camps, occupation of oil fields, and a complete shutdown of oil production in South Sudan. This in turn affected all efforts of state building and peace building. At the same time, South Sudan had major internal security problems. The country's largest state, Jonglei, was mired in a cycle of intercommunal violence in which thousands of civilians had been killed. Jonglei was also a microcosm testing the country's leadership and us in the United Nations. It was here we would face our greatest challenge prior to the December 2013 crisis and the civil war. But these problems were minor compared to what would come later. So the second transition, from liberation struggle to government, was predictably very difficult. The country was awash with weapons, mostly in civilian hands. Lack of commitment prevented necessary reform. This implied turning the liberation movement into a political party, for one, and the liberation force into a national army, two. Both processes stalled. The security sector was not reformed and contained tens of thousands of former militia, which were poorly integrated into the army. Command and control was poor, corruption rampant, and inflation in rank a major problem. The SPLA itself had 700 generals, the highest per capita in the world, I believe. Furthermore, the liberators failed to use the interim CPA period to strengthen the foundations on which the country could be built through stronger institutions. They also ignored numerous warnings against corruption and mismanagement. This liberation curse took hold, where people felt entitled to power. It was their turn to eat. South Sudan was soon afflicted by the oil curse. So two curses, liberation curse and oil curse. Oil revenue became an irresistible temptation for cadres who had spent most of their lives in the bush. Resources lubricated patronage networks, while significant amounts were simply siphoned away to foreign bank accounts. And you will find a lot of detail on these corruption scandals in the book. And for the first time, by the way. Instead of cleaning up, at the very least at independence, the liberators continued to eat and institutions remained weak. I had many discussions with Princeton about this when we were in Juba. The third transition, the complex transition to independence, was therefore marked by continuity and very limited change. The people who expected to finally reap the fruits of peace and freedom saw their hopes dashed. They continued to wait for schools for their children, clinics for their sick, and roads to get to the markets. South Sudan ended up being, by far, the biggest spender of public funds in the region. Per capita, 3 times as much as Kenya and 4 times as much as Uganda. However, South Sudan spent 1/4 of their neighbors on education, 1/5 or 6 on health. It was more likely, and is still, that a teenage girl dies in childbirth than she will enter grade 8 at school. The money went elsewhere. It was ruled by the elite for the elite. Although attempts were made by the president to address the cancer of corruption in 2012, and we did try on our side to assist in that particular process, 5 steps against corruption, etc., they were not followed through. The liberation curse and the oil curse prevailed. This also implied that state institutions, including the army, were insufficiently developed to sustain the pressure of an escalating political crisis. So the institutions were weak.